It's still weird calling them that without Kawhi Leonard, obviously, but never mind that. They go to the conference finals. They're part of the Final Four and get ready for the Miami Heat. No Milwaukee Bucks, obviously no Raps. It's all about the C's and the Heat. Who would have thought after years of thinking, of course, they're going to get to the NBA Finals with the likes of Kelly Olynyk and Jay Crowder? Well, now those guys are on the other side standing in their way of contending for a championship. Let's get into it. Adam Kaufman, my producer, Evan Valenti, and Steve Bulpett, who I know everyone out there is very familiar with, of course, covered the Boston Celtics, the entire NBA for decades with the Boston Herald. And Steve, we are anxious to see where you land next, if for no other reason than because nobody is as plugged into that organization as you are to this day. And we miss your coverage dearly.
Well, it's nice of you to say. Nice of you to fib for me. I appreciate that.
No, we mean it sincerely and really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. And I know that obviously you have still been following everything very closely and watching the NBA. And before we even get into the C's specifically, not enough can be said about how strange life is right now and the pandemic and all that has gone along with it. I hope that you and yours are staying safe and healthy and happy. And just as you watch the NBA and this bubble environment, I'm sure in all your years, you never could have envisioned anything like this.
No, I mean, ever since I stopped taking drugs, I never thought, I never took drugs. No, it's crazy, but it's funny. Like the road team won every game, right? In the Boston-Toronto series. Sure. This is more pure basketball. This is, if you try to eliminate variables to figure out which is the better team. Well, a lot of that's gone now, without the travel, without the home crowd, without, whatever. This is a pure way to decide, if we're looking at, figuring out which team is the best, this is the kind of environment that probably is the better way to get it done.
You like that? Just as an NBA fan, I know for years, for decades, we've said talent wins in the NBA more than any other sport. Ultimately, that is going to be the team that has the champion with very rare exception. You think of that Pistons team almost 20 years ago at this point. That was not the most talented team, top to bottom. It didn't have that superstar player, but typically there are the Jordans, more recently the LeBrons, obviously the new big three in Boston back in '08. But right now it really is, to your point, it's about the best team out there on the floor. It no longer necessarily is these guys that deal the best in all of those variables of home court advantage and home crowd and travel and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a positive of it, being able to see it in a purer form. But overall, it's a negative, because if you look at how the NBA came back into prominence, it was Bird, Magic, the Lakers, and the Celtics in the early 80s. The late 70s, the NBA, they were looking to contract teams. That's a real thing that was in the works to happen. And Bird and Magic, Boston, LA, West Coast, East Coast, that stuff, that drama is what enhanced the league, brought it back. And Michael Jordan once those guys had put it on solid footing. I mean, we're still talking about a league that had its finals games on tape delay, or excuse me, not on tape delay, but on out of prime time. Excuse me. And so that the league was created by that drama, by the fans. People were watching these games. Like basketball, people will like now. They'll enjoy watching the pure basketball, but if you just took all the basketball fans in the country, that's a relatively, it's a smaller portion than NBA fans. NBA fans, you're talking about adding in people who care about the atmosphere, the crowds, the frenzy, all that stuff, the drama. And I think that you lose a lot of that in this situation. But just pure buckets, if you're looking for a positive out of this mess, then that would be it.
Well, with the NBA right now, and obviously we are gearing up toward this Final Four, I know over in the West, either way, well, most especially for the people that want LA, Lakers, Clippers, there are tons of superstars. In the East, it's not necessarily the case. You know, you have an all-star in Kemba Walker. Gordon Hayward, if he returns, he's been that player, and hopefully he will be again. We'll talk about him. Jaylen Brown will be an all-star at some point. I think most people are convinced of that. Jason Tatum, he is a superstar in the making. Some would say he already is, and very young guy and so successful. And then you have Jimmy Butler on the other side, who's never been at this stage in all his years and all his stops in the NBA. So there's a lot of newness to this conference final on the East side. Now, normally we save predictions for the end. I want to get there right off the hop. I think Celtics are going to win this 1 in 6, and I want your thoughts, and then we can get into the how and what.
Well, I'm not much of a predictor, but the way I look at those things is if each team were to play to its maximum, who would win? And I think that if the Celtics play to their max, they win the series. But that doesn't mean they will, because Miami plays a style that can easily take the Celtics away from what they do, that can really injure the way the Celtics want to play. So I don't think it's a solid that Boston wins this at all, even though if you look player for player, you'd say, oh, I'll take Boston's guys over their guys. I just think it's going to be a lot more complicated than that.
That in mind, what do you think C's fans should be most concerned about for this series? What makes, what's the most dangerous obstacle, I suppose, on the Heat side?
Well, the most dangerous obstacle is the Heat have so many good outside shooters that if those guys are allowed to get on a roll, forget about it. No matter what you do, it's not going to matter because Miami they've got good 3-point shooters, and they'll be good against good defense. But if you start letting those guys hit shots, contested threes, and they get into that groove, it's going to get wild. So to me, the series comes down to this. The Celtics defensively have to be locked in. You saw them that way a lot against Toronto, but not all the time. And that's where they got in trouble. The Miami will hurt you even worse than Toronto could. So I think, perimeter defense, ball pressure, keeping the Heat from making that first pass or making it easily that gets them into their offense. And they don't necessarily need to pass. They're a good dribble handoff team. They're a good catch and shoot team. Again, they've got guys that just can get their shot off quickly. And in Jimmy Butler, you're looking at the reason why the series against Philadelphia was easy and why the series against Miami won't be. Philadelphia, that was a huge mistake. They should have done whatever, including, chains, athletic tape, whatever, to keep Jimmy Butler in Philadelphia, because that team Philadelphia just so mismatched. But in Jimmy Butler, you had a guy who could go get his own shot. And Philadelphia really didn't have that afterward. And now Miami does have a guy like that. So, if it's a handful of points game down into crunch time, Jimmy Butler's the kind of guy who can win that kind of game. And so, they've got Duncan Robinson's going to be huge in this series, keeping him in check if you can. They've got guys at Tyler Herro who will just, wind up from somewhere in downtown Orlando and fire away. It's going to be interesting, but if you're the Celtics, offense, great. You're going to play your offense. You've got to make sure that every bit of energy you have, you don't leave anything in the bucket on the defensive end.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think when you look at Miami now, I haven't watched all of Miami throughout the entire season, but I caught a lot of them in the bubble because I think they're just fun to watch. And after watching Toronto up close for 7 games, I think that the half-court offense between the two teams is pretty, stark, okay? Toronto's a great team in transition, but when you slow them down in the half court, if it's not Kyle Lowry or Fred VanVleet really initiating, they get kind of bottled up and they don't really know what to do. I didn't love Toronto's half court offense. Flip side of that, I love Miami's half-court offense. It's just much quicker. They get into sets quicker. The ball moves side to side, inside out. And those shooters become really important. But I think I am deeply concerned with what Boston does with Bam Adebayo. Because I think Bam, the way he's grown into his position this year, he's not just a shot blocker anymore. He's way more complicated than that. I mean, at Kentucky, he's kind of a pick and dive guy, sort of a pick and pop guy, but more of a pick and dive guy. Athletic as hell, runs the floor, rim runs, kind of like what people want Robert Williams to do. Now he's got to Miami. Now he's got a little bit of dribble drive game. He can put the ball on the deck, spin, create his own shot. He can pass out of, the high post if he needs to. And that's what really opens up the shooters. And what gets me really concerned is you got a Boston Celtics team that got beat up a little bit on the offensive glass in that series against Toronto, where Toronto get offensive rebounds and kick it out to a Fred VanVleet or an OG Anunoby or a Kyle Lowry or somebody. Replace those shooters now with Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, Goran Dragic, a red-hot Jay Crowder, which I can't believe it's still happening, Kelly Olynyk, who can shoot threes. You can get buried in a hurry. And as much as you want to limit your damage in transition, I'm gonna piggyback off you, Steve. Sticking to shooters in the half court is going to be, I think, the biggest thing of this series, in my opinion.
Yeah, and because your point about Adebayo, what impresses me the most is now the Celtics have to be wary of any, and he's not overly tall, but at 6'9", he still is a serious threat down low or in the paint. But he's a guy that if you try to help, he will make the pass, and he'll make the right pass. And again, you don't want to give their shooters in Catholic school during the dances, it was room for the Holy Ghost in the middle. You don't want to leave room for the Holy Ghost. And I'm not even Catholic, but I went to a Catholic college. Go University of Dayton. But seriously, you've got to stay up tight on those guys. And again, it's like playing with kind of with a grenade, tossing a grenade around the pins out, and if they get hot, then all of a sudden they'll make shots against the best defense, against the tightest defense. You can have Jaylen Brown up on the guy, and he's not going to care, because at the very heart of it, the offense always has some edge over the defense, because the offensive player knows what he's going to do before the defensive player knows what the offensive player is going to do. So, having a breadth of room to get up your shot, that's huge. And Miami's also in that other situation where they're on a roll. They're playing with that good feeling. That feeling is important, that we're in this together, it's working, we're sharing the ball, we're not worrying about it, it's not sticking. The Celtics have that feeling this year. They didn't last year. But still, one of the biggest reasons Celtics Raptors went 7 is because on offense, the ball stuck a lot. There were too many times where a guy says, okay, I'm going to go make a play now. Killer. That's not good for you. I've said it before, I'll say it 1,000 times. Ball movement is life. And guys, as good as Jaylen Brown is and Jason Tatum is, going one-on-one, making a move, getting a shot up over somebody, they are much better finishers. So if you can get them the ball within a step of the bucket and they can just finish, that is so much better. And again, ball movement it's what keeps guys, an open shooter shouldn't have had to go with like 4 possessions without touching the ball. And this is what, the Celtics need to do. We talked a lot about their defense, but offensively, that's got to be the plan as well. The ball can't stick.
A guy that we have not really talked about, Marcus Smart, was excellent in that Toronto series. I think opened up a lot of eyes when it comes to his fan club. People know this listening to this show. If I'm not the president of that group, I'm certainly on the board. Big Marcus Smart guy, and I think a lot of people are who watch him day in and day out. I imagine you're the same. But what I'm wondering is, going into this series, if in fact Brad Stevens is correct in that we will see Gordon Hayward at some point. We know he's been ruled out for game 1 with that ankle injury, but he's back in the bubble. He's working out, he's practicing, he's getting closer. Who knows? Maybe game 2 on Thursday. We take these things day by day. What impact does that have on Smart? Is Hayward, when he returns, coming off the bench? Is he eating into Smart's minutes? Is Smart worrying about eating into Hayward's minutes? How much rust could there possibly be after such a long, it's going to be a full month, if not 5 weeks away from playing, since they opened up the playoffs when he suffered that injury in game 1. So how quick is the hook from Stevens to go back to what worked against Toronto? What is the impact here from Gordon Hayward when it comes to his factoring in as really an X factor, for lack of a better way of putting it?
I think you cannot know the answer to that right now. It's hard to figure out, how is he going to come back? How they're going to use him? I'm not sure. And you could easily start him, but what Marcus Smart gives you defensively to start a game off is invaluable. Then again, you look at the Celtics, Marcus Smart is in the starting lineup after halftime, and how terrible have the Celtics been to start the third quarter.
Yep.
So, and I'm not putting that on Marcus Smart, but what Gordon Hayward does is he lengthens your good. He takes what you can do well and ball movement and all these things, and he makes other guys better. I think it's hilarious when you look at people, pundits, whomever, that look at him at Gordon Hayward and say, "Oh, look at his numbers. You're paying this much for this here, and he ain't any good. Look at his, he's only scoring this much. This is terrible." But if you really look at Gordon Hayward's numbers, they're incredibly good. What he's producing for his usage rate
incredibly efficient.
Is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I wrote a couple of years ago that what's funny here is that if you didn't know what you were getting fully when you drafted Jason Tatum. You didn't know he was going to get this good this fast. Mm-hmm. Would you have spent all that money on Gordon Hayward? Probably not. You'd probably try to put it into someone larger, someone that meets a need more. Because that's an awful lot of money to spend for that quote-unquote role. It may be eventually what puts you over the top, which means it's worth it, but it's interesting. But in terms of what Gordon Hayward gives you, he doesn't just give you his numbers. He gives you his numbers in a small usage rate, and he gives you his numbers while moving the ball. And so if you look at what other guys are able to do, and Gordon Hayward has a piece of that as well. It's like the wait staff tipping the busboys at the end of the night. You got to save a little something for Gordon. Put a little something in his bag as you walk by his locker.
I need you to write a book of just like idioms and sayings you've used for this entire podcast, because there's like 4 or 5 different lines you've dropped that are just absolutely brilliant. Like that last one is really great because, again, anybody that, outside looking at Gordon Hayward's numbers is not really that impressive. But I'm pretty sure, like, didn't Danny go on 98.5 and was like, if you actually look at the numbers, Gordon Hayward is the most like efficient player of the NBA with his usage rate, maybe in NBA history. I know it was of this year, but it was.
I don't pay attention to anything Ainge says.
Well, yeah, right.
But this is the weird crap that goes through my head all the time. So that,
right,
shows you how scary it is to be like stuck with me.
Yeah, well, Gordon is going to be the biggest question mark for Boston, I think, out of everything, and it just stinks because every time it seems like he gets somewhat back to old Gordon Hayward, quote unquote, and that guy, the guy in Utah was never going to be the guy here. But anyway, getting back to looking like his old self.
He wasn't going to see the ball as much, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
those numbers were never going to be replicated.
Never going to happen. No, but when he is on the floor and you see it, it's just like you look at him, you're like, yeah, that's what that looks like. He's cutting well off the basketball, moving guys around, changing the geometry of the floor, not without exactly having the ball in his hands. He can do all that stuff while there's stuff's going on over here, which will make him super valuable. But my fear is, you bring him back, then he gets reacclimated, but this is not your normal scenario. This is not in the middle of the regular season where it's, January and, guys are getting ready to go on vacation for the All-Star break, or, guys are worried about minutes as we get closer to the postseason, or even in the bubble scenario where everybody's like kind of remembering how to play basketball again. This is smack dab in the middle of the Eastern Conference Finals where the winner goes home and you have to start making sacrifices. And Brad, I don't envy his position at all, being in a position where he has to look at the team and balance, how it's going. Like I'm not the biggest Brad Wannamaker fan, but I will admit right now, he had a lot of big moments, in that series against Toronto where he was a zone buster, would push the pace, had a couple of good defensive plays, hit a couple of big threes. And that's the guy I look at. Maybe Gordon replaces, not necessarily a Smart's minutes at all, because I think Smart just has to be on the floor for the big moments, whether it's starting or closing or anything in between. But where Gordon could make the biggest impact, in my opinion, Steve, and maybe you're different from this, is that backup, that third, that tertiary ball handler spot that Brad occupied. If you could find a way to translate those minutes to Gordon, I think that might be the best case scenario. You in agreement with that?
Look, whether it's his minutes or, some of Semi Ojeleye, what Ojele's role was, you're just stretching, you're stretching your good further. Brad Wannamaker he takes solid and brings it to a better level. If people say, well, what does Brad Stevens see in Brad Wannamaker? Let's see. Brad Stevens, the former point guard. Here's Brad Wannamaker, who wasn't a point guard until he became a pro, by the way, and he's made himself into a point guard, makes good decisions, plays tough, plays physical defense. He handles the ball, gets you into your offense. That love affair was easy to predict. The Brad thing. But now you look at Ojeleye, and he's a weird case to me, because I think a lot of his talent, but here's a guy. Everyone thinks of NBA players as a certain way. Here's a guy that's just, he's there for the team. He's playing physical defense. He's getting up on people. Exactly what you want. As far as his shot goes, the mechanics are there, all these things. But here's an NBA guy who doesn't have enough arrogance. He's not enough of a jerk. This is a guy that, when he and I have talked about it, in more colorful language, it's like you need to be more of more of an. Anyway,
there you go.
But it's seriously, because he's a guy that should be saying, like, I get the ball, it's going up, take this, have lunch, but he gets the ball, and sometimes he'll hesitate. Sometimes he won't. He had some good shots in the Toronto series, but a couple times you watch enough basketball, you can see when a guy's playing or shooting with confidence and when he's not. And he may say he has confidence. He may actually, that's, confidence is, where it's at for a shooter. I've got my theory on it. If you're ready to shoot or not. The great players in the last couple minutes of the game aren't great because they're just talented. It's because they have the greater belief that their shots are going in. In the case of a Larry Bird, and I think it's practice. He got up so many shots that at the end of the game, he's like, subconsciously, I don't think Larry sat down and wrote this out in longhand, but it's like, I've earned the right to make this shot. And that's the kind of mental approach that has to be. I think I know that Shemi works hard enough, and I know he's got all the right things in his mind as far as he's playing the right way. But anyway, we kind of got off on a Shemi tangent, but I think that's where some of Gordon's minutes could come. But then again, like you're saying, they could just come from Brad Wannamaker, because they may want to keep Shemi's defense as part of that, use his fouls or just use his get up in someone's face on the perimeter, that ability, because you're going to be switching a lot. And, you're going to see Shemi, he's going to wind up on Bam Adebayo once or twice. and his ability to be physical and to at least get low on Adebayo will be important.
Steve Bulpett here with us. And Steve, this will be the last one for me because we don't want to keep you forever. But obviously we've talked all about how the Celtics are good, how the Heat are good, when these two teams are at their best. One aspect we have not specifically honed in on are the coaches, because had, the C's gone down to Nick Nurse and the Raptors. And Nick Nurse obviously is the coach of the year. He's an excellent coach, won a championship last year. I'm taking nothing from him, but I do believe, as most people did, despite seeding, Celtics were the superior team to the Raptors, and they played like it throughout the majority of that series with a couple of blowout wins. To go up 2-0 in that series, to have double-digit leads in Game 6, in Game 7, the controversial call, obviously, with Kemba not getting fouled. They lose that game in the double overtime. If the C's had lost, not that it would have mattered. Brad Stevens just signed an extension. Nobody in their right mind would have been calling for him to go anywhere. I certainly wouldn't have been. I don't think either of you would have been either, but you would have heard it. Some in the national media and local as well would have said, this guy can't win. Celtics need to make a change. Well, now he's going up against Eric Spoelstra, who obviously, he's been to the mountaintop. He has coached to NBA Finals championship wins. He is at a point now that Brad has been, but not ultimately succeeded to where he wants to be. What is the coaching breakdown in this series for you?
Well, I think that in this situation, I don't think anyone's going to get beat by a coaching mistake. And, if you look at how Toronto played, if I'm Toronto, I probably would have wanted to see Ibaka more. And let's take a step back for a second. And I mentioned this to a friend the other day. The Celtics have to be happy as hell that the Raptors last year traded Jonas Valanciunas away, because that's the kind of guy that really used to hurt them inside. And they weren't getting hurt inside as much. Siakam was a little fidgety inside and all that, but so I probably would have wanted to see, if I'm a Toronto fan, I would have wanted to see Ibaka more. But anyway, I think at least you can take it off the table in this series that that one of the coaches is going to make a mistake. You look at the Celtics last year again, in the playoffs, and I don't think you can find fault with what Brad Stevens coached them or was telling them to do. I know you can find huge fault with their ability or willingness to execute it, to play together, to believe in one another. And at a certain point, that is out of the coach's hands. What are you going to do? You're going to, scold them, put them in the corner for a timeout? It's hard to do. And you can say, well, the coach got to get the players to do this stuff. True. But at a certain point, the horses are out of the corral. And so I think you can take the coaching blunder thing off the table. Having said that, whatever happens in this series, if the Celtics lose, whichever way Brad Stevens uses Gordon Hayward, assuming Hayward comes back at some point, will be, to some people, the reason why they lost the series. No matter which way he plays it with Gordon Hayward, that's what it'll be the reason why, according to some people, air quotes. You can't do this on radio.
Yeah.
That's some weirdness we need to get ready for now.
I like that. You got to get ready for some of the weird stuff. You look at the way, Toronto was a team without I would consider Kyle Lowry a really, really good player. But they don't have that quote-unquote superstar. But they still have a lot of good role players around him, a lot of smart guys, well-coached, play tough. Same thing here, I think, with the Heat. You have a Jimmy Butler upgrade, I think, although Kyle Lowry, in his own right, is a spectacular player and probably one of the most underrated guys in the league. Jimmy Butler is very similar in terms of can get to the bucket, can draw fouls, is a pest on defense, smart guy. Again, a well-coached team in Miami. But you look at the way, this team has sort of been put together, and it's been kind of refreshing to see a difference in attitude as we've gone on to the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's, a team that looks out for each other instead of, plays the blame game. You have Kemba Walker always talking about how his teammates have carried him and how, thankful he is that he can go, 3 of 14, whatever, and they don't get blown out by 50 points. That was actually one of my favorite quotes, I think, from the last series, is how he could have a bad game and still the Chiefs get the win. And you have a team in Miami who's kind of been there, done that. Boston, in terms of like Spoelstra, obviously, but Boston is, been here before. I look at the coaching matchup. I don't see a whole lot of, differences there, but I like the way both these teams are sort of playing right now. Like and I don't sure if you prefer one or the other, Steve. So maybe this will be the last question I have. Do you prefer a team that's had the rest and gone through all, like they swept Indiana, they took care of, in a very impressive fashion, took care of Milwaukee? Or would you like to be the team in Boston that's had an easy go in the first round, swept Philadelphia, but had to go blow for blow with the former champion, with the reigning champion, had to go 7 games, exhausting fashion too. You're talking about guys playing 50 minutes, 40 minutes a game to try and get through this thing. Would you rather be the team that's had some rest and been able to look at things and analyze things and sit back and pick things apart, or be the team like Boston who's kind of been up against it a little bit more and had their backs against the wall, so to speak?
Well, the truth is, you're not going to know until you see, how they come out of the corners for the first round and throw their punches. The Celtics, you would think that they would have learned their lesson at the end, just in game 3 against Toronto, allowing that game to be close. Should have learned their lesson. Then they get waxed in game 4. They shouldn't have, that game 7, it shouldn't have been as close as it was. And yeah, Toronto was technically the defending champions. But the 3 of us could put on Kansas City Chiefs jerseys right now, and it doesn't make us Super Bowl champs. That wasn't the defending champion Raptors without Kawhi Leonard, without Danny Green, and with Marc Gasol, who, whatever Cliff, who's the guy on First Take with Stephen A.
Max Kellerman.
Max Kellerman, whatever Cliff that he had Brady going over, Marc Gasol found it. And Marc Gasol is one of my favorite players, been one of my favorite players. He's a guy that I think if the Celtics could have got him several years ago, I think they would have been, a contender quickly. Guys that do the dirty stuff, do the simple stuff every single game. But maybe it was the way he was used some, but that wasn't Gasol. So this series, does Miami come out and play the grind game, or do all of a sudden they think, hey, we're pretty good? Because once a team starts acting like they're pretty good, they're screwed for that night. It's happened to the Celtics a number of times before. But the biggest thing we're seeing right now is, I've been talking about for years and years and years, there's regular season basketball, there's playoff basketball. Mm-hmm. They might as well be hockey and tennis. They are different sports in a lot of ways. Philadelphia looks great in the regular. Ben Simmons looks great in the regular season, but his numbers, I've always wondered, are they a product of Philadelphia's pace, regular season pace? Because when I've seen him in the playoffs, I've wondered aloud about his decision making and how good a player is he when it becomes a possession game in the playoffs, when it's not just, a guy can get hot and beat you on a given night in the regular season, and you don't think much about it. It's harder to do in the playoffs, and it's certainly harder to do the next game. So, I think it's going to be interesting, and I would reserve all judgments until I see the first half of the first game even, because, how are these teams going to come out? Are they going to play up to their standard? Are they going to play up to their character, to the characters that they have created for themselves?
Steve Bulpett, you've been reading and listening to his coverage of the Celtics and the NBA for decades, and hopefully for many, many years to come. Steve, we're going to continue on with the show. We'll let you jump off, but I do want to leave you with this. I know you're a music guy, so I don't know if you're taking requests when it comes to reporting, but I would love for you to be the one that tells the story as to what happened to Janos. We haven't seen Janos since February. Many people want to know if it's actually Danny Ainge. She's never really copped to that. But this character here that became such a Twitter legend so quickly in the Celtics, weird Celtics Twitter community, the man's gone silent on us.
And this relates to music.
Yeah, I didn't quite get that one there.
Well, yeah, in the sense of taking requests. I'm
All right.
I'm asking for a reporting request.
I'm honestly hoping you didn't hurt your rotator cuff on that reach.
Oh.
That's why I saved it for the end.
I have no idea. I mean, I think the tweets are too good to be Danny.
Yeah.
But
Could it be Zarin?
Say music, because one of the things that I could potentially be doing really soon is a book about a certain band that had a really meteoric rise and went away. But I'm talking with one of the band members now that was a friend but anyway, I've said too much.
Okay, something to keep an eye. We won't push for details, but we'll keep an eye out. And
I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to do it in my head right now. I got to figure that out. My goal is going to be to figure out.
One clue.
Okay.
Give me one.
Not Chumbawamba.
Well,
wow. I don't care any. You know what, Steve? I'm out in this book now. It's not Chumbawamba. I'm out.
He didn't like my joke. I got knocked down, but I'm getting up again, so it's okay.
There we go. There we go.
Thank you.
Saved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think if I have an award here, we can give him Comeback Player of the Year.
There you go.
That's strong.
That was well done, Adam.
Bulpett, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Guys, be well.
Thanks, Steve.